In the quiet village of Egum, surrounded by hills and forests, there lived a young girl named Tari. She was only 18, but her heart carried the wisdom of someone much older. Her skin was the color of warm earth, her eyes wide like the morning sky. People in the village often said, "Tari is as gentle as the wind and as kind as flowing water." And they were right. Tari's life had not been easy. When she was just 5 years old, her parents drowned in a canoe accident on their way back from the market. The river had been rough that day, its waves angry and wild. The villagers searched for days, but the couple was never found. All that remained were 2 overturned baskets and a broken paddle. From that day on, Tari was raised by her grandmother, Mama Amora. Mama Amora was old but strong. She carried Tari on her back, fed her, taught her how to pray to the ancestors, and told her stories under the moonlight. She taught her to be humble, to give even when she had little, and to always treat others with respect. Under Mama Amora's love, Tari grew into a girl with a kind soul, a soft smile, and a quiet strength. But even with all that love, Tari often felt lonely. When she walked to the stream or the farm, she saw girls her age giggling with their mothers, helping with babies, or dreaming about marriage. Tari smiled with them, but deep inside, she wished for a family of her own, for someone who would stay. Then came Obinna. Obinna was a young trader from the city, tall and smooth-talking, with eyes that danced when he laughed. He came to Egum every month during the big market days. He sold spices, fabrics, and sometimes shiny things that caught the attention of the village girls. But it was Tari he noticed. The first time he saw her, she was helping Mama Amora sell plantains under the old Iroko tree. Her hair was tied with a red scarf, and her hands moved gently as she arranged the fruits. Obinna stopped in front of their mat and said, "Do the fruits grow sweeter because you touched them, or are they sweet because of your smile?" Tari blushed and looked away, unused to such bold words. Mama Amora chuckled and shook her head. "These city boys and their sweet mouths," she mumbled. Over the next few weeks, Obinna kept coming to their mat. He bought more than he needed, just to talk to Tari. He spoke of life in the city, big buildings that touched the clouds, roads that glowed at night, and places where music never stopped. His stories wrapped around her heart like a warm blanket. At first, Tari was cautious. But slowly, her guard dropped. Obinna was kind. He never rushed her. He listened when she spoke. He asked about her dreams. He even helped her carry her basket once when her arm was sore. "I will come back for you," he said one evening as the sun set behind the hills. "When I have enough money, I will return and make you my wife." Tari's heart fluttered like a bird set free. But the next market day, Obinna did not come. Nor the next. Nor the next. Weeks turned to months. No letters. No messages. Nothing. Tari waited by the path that led to the market, her eyes searching every traveler's face. Mama Amora noticed the sadness in her granddaughter's eyes, but she said nothing. She simply held her hand tighter at night and whispered prayers for healing. Then, one morning, Tari began to feel strange. Her stomach twisted. Her body ached. The smell of food made her nauseous. She thought it was a small sickness, something that would pass. But it didn't. Mama Amora looked at her long and hard one day. "Tari," she said gently, "have you done something you shouldn't have?" Tari broke down in tears. She was pregnant. The shame hit her like thunder. She had always been the good girl, the respectful one, the kind one. What would the village say? What would Mama Amora think? But Mama Amora did not shout. She did not curse. She simply held Tari close and said, "My child, the river still flows even after the storm. You will survive this." They decided to keep the news quiet, hoping to deal with it slowly. But fate had more sorrow to give. Just as Tari's belly began to show, Mama Amora fell ill. It started as a cough, then turned to fever. The village healer tried herbs, but nothing worked. One night, under the flickering light of an oil lamp, Mama Amora took Tari's hand and whispered, "Be strong, my child. Life is cruel, but so are you brave." And then, she was gone. Tari wailed until her voice was raw. The village came for the burial. They mourned with her, but the whispers began soon after. Her grandmother is gone. Who will guide her now? She's pregnant. Who is the father? She was always quiet. We didn't know she had such shame in her. The elders called her. They sat under the meeting tree, their faces serious and unmoving. "You have brought disgrace to your grandmother's name," said Elder Chika, a man with a voice like stone. "You are young, unmarried, and now carrying a child no one knows the father of. What does that say about you?" Tari could not speak. Her tears fell silently. "You have no place among us like this," another elder said. "It is better you go, find somewhere else to give birth and start over." She begged. She pleaded. "I have no one else. Please." But their hearts were cold. "You are cursed," one woman muttered. "Your parents drowned, your grandmother died, and now this." That night, Tari packed her few belongings into a cloth sack, 2 wrappers, a broken necklace her mother once gave her, and a calabash of water. No one came to say goodbye. She walked out of the village barefoot, her belly heavy and her heart broken. She did not know where she was going. She only knew that Egum, the place that raised her, was no longer home. As she walked into the forest path, the stars blinked above her. The wind rustled the trees as if whispering prayers only she could hear. "I am alone," she said to the night. "But I will not give up." With each step into the unknown, she carried not just the weight of her unborn child, but the silent hope that somewhere, somehow, there was a place where a girl like her could still begin again. The forest of Onitsha was not a place many walked alone. Tall trees towered above, their branches heavy with leaves that whispered with the wind. The ground was damp, the air thick, and wild animals called from deep within the shadows. But none of that mattered to Tari. She walked with swollen feet, a round belly, and a heart heavy with pain. For days, she wandered without direction. The road was long and winding, and each step brought new aches. Her back throbbed, her legs ached, and the weight of her unborn child pressed harder with each mile. The sun beat down during the day, and the cold bit at her skin when the night came. She had no shelter, no food, no one to call her own. Sometimes she cried. Other times she prayed. But most of the time, she just kept walking, because there was no other choice. The forest whispers. On the 3rd night, a storm rolled in. The clouds turned dark, and thunder cracked the sky like a whip. Rain poured down in sheets, soaking Tari's clothes and chilling her to the bone. She crouched under a thick tree, hugging her belly, whispering to her unborn child. "Please be strong, my little one," she murmured. "Mama will find a place for us. We will survive." She closed her eyes and thought of her grandmother's voice, of how Mama Amora would tell her bedtime stories and rub her back when she had bad dreams. Now, all she had were the memories, and the hope that they would carry her forward. The rain didn't stop until morning. Her legs were covered in mud. Her hands trembled. Hunger twisted in her stomach like a knife. She chewed bitter leaves from a bush, the only thing she could find, and drank from puddles on the road. Still, she walked. The village of Ojoma. On the 5th day of her journey, just as the sun was rising behind the hills, she saw smoke curling in the sky ahead. It was a village. Her steps quickened. She came to the outskirts of a small, quiet place called Ojoma. The village was nestled between two low hills, with neat rows of clay huts and children playing near a stream. Chickens ran free, and women carried firewood on their heads, moving with grace. Tari stood at the edge, unsure. Her clothes were torn, her hair matted, her face hollow. She looked like a ghost, a stranger from another world. As she stood trembling, an old woman spotted her. "Eh? Who is this girl?" the woman called, approaching with slow, steady steps. Tari opened her mouth, but no words came. She was too tired to speak. Her knees buckled, and she fell to the ground. The woman rushed to her side. "My child. What has happened to you?" With what little strength she had, Tari whispered, "I have nowhere to go. Please. I'm just looking for a place to rest. Mama Ijioma's kindness." The woman was Mama Ijioma, a widow who lived alone near the edge of the village. She had no children left, all had grown and moved away, and she spent her days selling firewood and herbs. Looking into Tari's eyes, she saw something she hadn't seen in years. Pain. Fear. Strength. Without another word, Mama Ijioma called to two nearby boys and told them to help her lift Tari. They carried her to a small, unused clay hut behind Mama's compound. It had not been lived in for many years, but the roof was still strong and the floor dry. "You will stay here," Mama said. "Rest first. We will talk later." She gave Tari water. Then warm yam porridge. Then a wrapper to change into. When Tari cried and thanked her, the old woman simply smiled and said, "Even the earth gives shelter to tired feet. Why should I do less?" Surviving on little. Tari stayed. For weeks, she cleaned the hut, gathered firewood, and helped Mama Ijioma grind herbs. She also began helping other villagers, fetching water, weeding gardens, and washing clothes. In return, they gave her food, coins, and sometimes old clothes. Life was hard, but it was life. She survived on what little she earned and filled her belly with wild fruits when she had no food. Each day she walked, her belly grew heavier. Her feet swelled, her back hurt, and her emotions came in waves. Some nights, she sat outside, staring at the stars. "I am sorry, Mama Amora," she whispered. "I wish I had made better choices. But I will do my best now." She worried constantly. How will I care for this child? Will I be a good mother? What if he gets sick? What if he needs more than I can give? Fear was her silent companion. A prayer for a miracle. One evening, after washing clothes by the stream, Tari sat under the moonlight and spoke aloud. "O great spirit of the land, ancestors who watch from the sky, please help me. I do not ask for gold or comfort. I only ask for strength, for myself and my child. Show me a sign. Let me know I am not alone." The wind stirred the trees gently. A firefly landed on her arm and glowed for a few seconds before flying off into the night. She smiled. Maybe that was a sign. She didn't know yet, but something was coming. The storm and the birth. One night, the sky grew dark again. Heavy clouds gathered, and thunder rumbled in the distance. Mama Ijioma had traveled to a nearby village to sell herbs and wouldn't return until the next day. Tari was alone in the hut, sweeping the floor, when a sharp pain shot through her belly. She gasped, dropping the broom. She held her stomach, sweat breaking out on her forehead. "No, no, not now," she whispered. Another pain. She tried to stand, but her legs buckled. The storm broke open above her, thunder cracking, rain hammering down on the thatched roof. Tari cried out, crawling toward her mat. The pains came harder, closer together. Her breath came in short gasps. Her body trembled. She screamed, sweat and rain mixing on her skin. There was no midwife. No elder. No comfort. Only her and the pain. She pushed. She screamed. She called out for her grandmother. For the gods. For anyone. And then, in the darkness, a cry. A tiny, fragile cry. Her baby. Her son. Chibik, God is strength. Tari reached for the child with shaking hands. He was small, slippery, and warm. His cries echoed in the room, strong and full of life. She wept as she held him to her chest. You made it, she whispered, sobbing. My baby, you made it. She used a wrapper to clean him. She wrapped him tight and rocked him gently. Through the tears, through the pain, she smiled. You are my strength, she said, kissing his forehead. You are the reason I'm still standing. She named him Chibik, which meant God is strength. And in that moment, though the storm still raged outside, though the future was uncertain, Tari felt peace. In the weeks after Chibik's birth, the sun still rose, the wind still blew, and life in Ojoma carried on, but for Tari, the world had changed forever. Now, her arms were never empty. Her back ached from carrying her child. Her sleep came in short, broken pieces. Her body was weak. Her mind was worn. She was a mother, but she was also still alone. Mama Ijeoma had returned the morning after the storm and wept at the sight of Tari and the newborn child. She cleaned the hut, made pepper soup, and helped care for the baby for a few days. But even Mama, kind as she was, had little. She was an old woman with her own burdens. Soon, Tari was left again to survive as best she could. A world that closed its doors. Tari tried to return to the small tasks she used to do in the village, fetching water, grinding herbs, sweeping compounds, but everything had changed. I know, not with a baby strapped to your back, one woman said, waving her away. Will you stop to breastfeed every hour? I need help, not more trouble, another man grumbled. Everywhere she turned, the answer was no. They were polite sometimes, but behind her back, she heard the whispers. She had no husband. How can we trust her with our homes? She should have stayed in her own village. She'll bring misfortune to Ojoma. The coins stopped coming. The little jobs dried up. The market women avoided her. Even the ones who once smiled at her turned their faces away. And Chibik, sweet as he was, needed milk. He cried often. He was always hungry. Tari did all she could. She chewed bitter leaves to make her milk flow. She drank water from the stream and fasted so her baby could eat. She sometimes picked wild fruits and mashed them with water, feeding him tiny bits. But it was not enough. She was starving, and her child was growing thin. The slow fall into despair. There were nights she didn't eat at all. Nights she sat in the hut, rocking Chibik as he cried, whispering promises she wasn't sure she could keep. It's okay, my son. Don't cry. Mama is here, just a little more time, please. But she could see it in his eyes, he was growing weaker. His once rosy cheeks were now pale. His cries sounded softer each day. Tari began to pray harder. Sometimes at the stream. Sometimes under the tree by the hut. She begged the gods. The ancestors. Even the stars. Please, I am not asking for gold. Just a way to feed my child. Help me. No help came. The breaking point. One cold night, after 3 days with no real food, Tari sat on the floor of her hut, her head in her hands, her stomach growling loudly. Chibik was asleep, his tiny breaths shallow. Her vision blurred. Her body trembled. Her soul felt like it was sinking into a dark hole. She couldn't take it anymore. I am a failure, she whispered. I cannot feed him. I cannot give him a future. She thought of Obina, the man who had made promises and vanished. She thought of Egum, the village that had turned its back on her. She thought of Mama Amora, and how ashamed she would be. A tear dropped onto her lap. Then another. Then she began to sob, loud, broken, aching sobs that filled the small hut. She cried for the life she lost. She cried for the child who deserved better. And in that hour of deep sorrow, a thought came. A terrible, terrifying thought. The decision. There is a river in the forest, she whispered, where travelers sometimes pass. Tari had seen it during her long walk from Egum. A wide river that curled through the trees, peaceful and strong. It was not far from Ojoma, only a few hours if she left at dawn. Maybe if I leave him there, someone with a good heart will find him. She shook her head. No. I can't. I can't give him away. But then she looked at Chibik. His arms were thin. His stomach flat. His breath weak. And she thought again, if I keep him, he will die in this hut. If I give him up, he might live. The choice was like fire on her skin. It burned. It broke her. But she stood up. The letter of love. Tari took the only clean cloth she had left and a piece of old paper Mama Ijeoma had once used to wrap herbs. She found a piece of charcoal and wrote in shaking letters. To the person who finds this baby. His name is Chibik, which means God is strength. Please love him. Please feed him. Please protect him. He is not abandoned because he was unloved, but because his mother had nothing. This child is my whole heart. I pray he becomes yours too. Tari. She folded the note and placed it carefully inside a pouch made of palm leaves. She tied it with string and set it aside. Then she bathed Chibik slowly, gently, like it would be the last time. She sang him the lullaby her grandmother used to sing. Sleep, little one, rest your eyes. The moon will watch you through the skies. And when you wake to morning's light, may your heart be strong, your path be right. The journey to the river. As dawn painted the sky in soft pink and gold, Tari wrapped Chibik in the clean cloth and tied him securely to her chest. She picked up the reed mat she had once woven with Mama Ijeoma and rolled it under her arm. Then she carried her son out of the hut, past the sleeping village, into the forest path. The trees whispered overhead. The earth was soft underfoot. Birds chirped, unaware of her pain. She walked for hours. With each step, her breath grew heavier. Her heart pounded like a drum inside her chest. When she finally reached the river, the sun had begun to rise higher. The water was still, like glass. Mist floated just above the surface. It was quiet. Peaceful. And she began to cry. The final goodbye. Tari spread the mat on the grass near the water's edge. She placed the pouch with the note beside it. Then, slowly, with trembling hands, she untied Chibik and laid him gently on the mat. He blinked up at her, his little hands curling. She kissed his forehead. My son, my Chibik, my light, she choked. I wanted to give you the world. I wanted to raise you strong, like your name. But all I have is love, and love alone cannot feed you. She took off the necklace her grandmother had given her, a simple string of black beads, and placed it around his tiny neck. This is from your great-grandmother. Let it remind you that you come from love. She knelt beside him. I pray someone with more strength than me finds you. Someone who can give you a home, a future. Chibik made a soft sound, a tiny whimper. Tari stood up, clutching her chest as if her heart might fall out. She turned. And ran. The sobs in the forest. As she ran through the trees, her cries echoed behind her. Her legs shook. Her breath came in gasps. Her soul screamed. She collapsed against a tree, sobbing so hard the forest itself seemed to cry with her. Back at the river, the baby's cry floated on the breeze. It rose through the branches. It echoed down the path. And somewhere, deep within the trees, someone was listening. Deep inside the ancient forest of Onitsha, where the trees grew tall and thick like the pillars of a forgotten temple, lived a woman the world had forgotten, Addis. Her name meant, daughter of a king, but there were no royal robes, no palace, and no crown upon her head. Addis lived in a quiet clay hut with a thatched roof, hidden behind curtains of vines. Birds nested near her windows. Monkeys swung from the trees above. Her home was surrounded by herbs, roots, and healing plants she had nurtured for years. No one dared come this deep into the forest. No one, except Fate. The woman who spoke to the wind. Many years ago, Addis had been the most respected healer in her village, Umuga. She had healed the chief's son from a deadly fever. She had delivered countless babies into the world. Her hands were gifted, her heart generous. But she carried a pain the village could not see. She had no children of her own. Time passed. The whispers grew louder. She has cursed hands, some said. The gods have closed her womb, others added. She can heal others but not herself. One terrible year, a strange sickness swept through Umuga. The villagers, afraid and desperate, turned their fear into anger. They needed someone to blame. And so, they chose Addis. The spirits are angry because of her, said the village priest. She must be banished. No one defended her, not even the mothers whose children she had saved. They feared the priest more than they respected her. With only the clothes on her back, she was dragged into the forest and left to die. But Addis did not die. She survived. And the forest became her home. The vision in the night. On the morning the wind carried Tari's cries through the trees, Addis woke from a strange dream. She had seen a crying child wrapped in white cloth, lying near a river. The sky above him glowed gold. The trees whispered, "Go now, Addis. The child is your destiny." Her heart beat fast as she opened her eyes. The fire in her heart had long burned out, but her spirit was wide awake. She packed herbs in a woven satchel, grabbed her walking stick, and stepped into the morning mist. The trees leaned toward her as she walked, the earth soft beneath her feet. For 2 hours, she followed the sound of birds and the feeling in her chest. Then, as she approached the river, she heard it. A baby crying. The river and the crying child. There, on a reed mat beside the riverbank, lay a tiny baby wrapped in cloth. His skin was pale, his lips trembling. He kicked weakly, his cries growing softer. Addis dropped to her knees. "Oh child," she whispered, her voice breaking. What mother would leave such a treasure here? Then she saw the necklace around his neck, a string of black beads, old and sacred. And beside him, a small pouch with a folded note inside. She read it slowly. "This child is my whole heart. I pray he becomes yours too." Tears filled Addis' eyes. "Then let the gods be my witness," she said. "You are mine now." She gathered the baby in her arms and wrapped him close to her chest. "You are not forgotten," she whispered. "You are chosen. The milk of mercy." Back at her hut, Addis stoked a fire and warmed herbs in a clay pot. She used a mix of boiled roots and crushed seeds to create a milk-like liquid, feeding it to the baby drop by drop with a small calabash spoon. But she knew this would not be enough. The child needed real nourishment. She needed to produce milk, and though her body had never birthed a child, her knowledge of nature had no limits. She crushed the seeds of the ogbono tree, mixed it with dried scent leaves, and added honey from her forest bees. She rubbed the mixture on her chest and massaged gently every morning and night. By the 7th day, her body responded. She cradled the baby, guiding him to her breast. He fed. And for the first time in years, Addis wept with joy. A new name, a new beginning. She named him Zikora, meaning you show the world. Because that is what you must do, she told him. Show the world who you are. Show the world where you came from. Show them that love can grow even from pain. Zikora grew quickly. By the time he could crawl, he had already memorized the feel of the herbs Addis used. By the time he could walk, he was pointing at birds and calling them by name. And by the time he was 5, he could mix simple herbs and whisper to the wind like his mother did. The forest embraced him. The animals did not fear him. He could sit beside the monkeys and feed them mangoes. Butterflies danced around him like he was one of their own. Even the river, his silent beginning, sparkled whenever he came near. The boy who belonged to nature. One morning, Addis found Zikora lying flat on the earth with his eyes closed. "What are you doing, my son?" she asked. "I am listening," he replied. "To what?" "The earth," he said. "She says it will rain soon." Addis smiled. He had inherited more than her knowledge, he had inherited her connection. She taught him the names of every leaf and every root. He learned how to crush bark for fever, how to make oil for wounds, and how to chant to the spirits when the moon was full. But more than that, Zikora learned kindness. Addis taught him to respect every life. "The ant has a purpose," she said. "Even the snake serves the forest. Do not harm unless you must. Not my blood, but my destiny." One evening, as the sun set through the treetops and cast golden light into their hut, Zikora sat beside Addis, resting his head on her lap. "Mother," he said softly, "where did I come from?" Addis looked into the fire for a long time. Then she placed a hand on his shoulder. "You did not come from my body, my son," she said. "But you came from my spirit. The day I found you, the trees led me to you. The river gave you up to me." Zikora looked into her eyes. "Then you are my true mother." Addis smiled, tears shining. "You are not my blood," she whispered. "But you are my destiny." And the forest, hearing her words, swayed with the wind as if nodding in agreement. The journey back to Egum was slow and quiet. After leaving her baby by the river, Tari walked with no words, no hunger, no tears left to cry. The forest no longer looked magical, it looked haunted. Haunted with guilt, with regret, with the memory of a baby's cry echoing through the trees. When she finally stepped into Egum, the villagers barely recognized her. Her once round face was thin, her skin darker from sun and sorrow. She walked straight to the elder's compound, carrying nothing but a lie she had prepared in her heart. A lie woven from pain. The elders gathered again under the old mango tree, their eyes watching her with quiet judgment. "Where have you been, Tari?" asked Elder Boma, the oldest among them. She bowed her head. "I went to birth my child, but he did not live. He died shortly after he was born." A long silence followed. Some elders looked at each other. Some nodded quietly. "Perhaps this is the God's way of correcting a mistake," one woman whispered. Tari said nothing. She had learned long ago that words could not change hearts already hardened. The elders told her she could return to her grandmother's compound, now empty, and live quietly. She would be washed, but allowed to stay. The river that held her tears. But Tari did not live quietly. Every evening, after her chores, she walked to the same river where she had once fetched water as a girl. The same river where she and Obina had laughed together. The same river she now knew only as a place of loss. There, she would sit on the rock by the edge, bury her face in her hands, and cry. "I am sorry," she whispered again and again. "I thought I was saving you. I thought someone would love you. But now, I don't know. I don't know anything." She never told anyone what she had done. Not even when Obinna returned. The return of the stranger. It was nearly 10 years later. A dusty evening when the sun was a deep orange and children played barefoot in the dirt. Tari was carrying yams from the market when she heard a soft voice behind her. Tari. She turned slowly. There he was, Obinna. His face older, his eyes softer, but the same boyish smile tugged at his lips. She dropped the yams. Obinna, she gasped. I came back, he said, stepping closer. I looked for you in the markets. In the villages. I asked about you for years. And when I finally came to Egum, they said you had returned. Tears spilled from her eyes. You left. I know, he said. My father fell ill when I returned to the city. I had to run the business. I wanted to come back sooner. I wrote, I tried to send word, but I failed you. He knelt in front of her. But I never stopped thinking about you, Tari. I still love you. Let me make it right. A new life, yet an old ache. They married under the bright Egum sun, with drummers playing and villagers smiling. Some whispered behind closed doors, but many were happy for Tari. Obinna was now a wealthy trader, respected and well-traveled. He built her a beautiful home near the heart of the village, with wide windows, a full garden, and servants who helped her cook and clean. Years passed. They lived in comfort, in peace. But at night, when Obinna was asleep beside her, Tari stared at the ceiling. She thought of Chibik. Is he alive? Was he found? Did someone love him, or did I send him to his death? The questions never stopped. They became her shadow. The boy with the dreams. Far from the village, deep in the green heart of the forest, Zikora was now a 10-year-old boy. Tall for his age, with sharp eyes and a kind heart, he moved through the forest like he belonged to it. Animals greeted him. Trees whispered his name. The earth seemed to bend to his will. But lately, strange dreams had been haunting him. Every night, he saw a woman kneeling by a river, crying. He could not see her face, but her sobs echoed in his ears. One night, he woke up gasping. He turned to Adis, who sat weaving a mat in the moonlight. Mother, he whispered, who is the woman in my dreams? Adis stopped. What woman? She cries by the river. She calls my name. I feel like I know her. Adis looked at him, her face unreadable. She had always known this day would come. The truth beneath the beads. The next morning, she took Zikora into the deepest part of the forest, to the river where she had found him. She knelt beside the rocks and pointed. This is where I found you, 10 years ago. You were crying, wrapped in cloth, lying on a mat. There was a note. There was a necklace, the beads you still wear. Zikora touched the black beads around his neck, suddenly heavy with meaning. Who left me here? He asked, his voice trembling. I do not know her name, Adi said. But I know she loved you. Her words, they were filled with pain. She did not abandon you, she gave you to the forest, hoping it would protect you. Zikora stared at the river. That woman, she's the one in my dreams. Yes, Adi said. And I believe the gods are calling you to find her. It is time. Preparing for destiny. Adi spent the next few weeks teaching Zikora not just herbs, but history. She showed him the note. She told him about the necklace. She helped him craft a staff of oak wood, decorated with forest stones and animal feathers. This staff is a symbol, she said. Of your journey. Of who you are. Zikora stood tall, the staff in his hand, his heart pounding with questions he had no answers for. Will she recognize me? I do not know, Adis replied. But the river remembers you. And the river flows toward your truth. As he prepared to leave, she hugged him tightly. "You are my son," she whispered. "And no matter where you go or what you find, you will always be my pride." He nodded, tears in his eyes. "I love you, mother." Then, as dawn broke over the forest, Zikora stepped onto the path that would lead him to his past. The morning sun poured golden light through the forest trees, painting the riverbank in warm color. The air was quiet except for the gentle flow of the river. Adi stood beside Zikora, her hand resting lightly on his shoulder. For the first time, he was not a boy of the forest. He was a boy of questions. "Mother," he said softly, "tell me again." Adi sighed. She had told him already, but she understood. The heart needs to hear the truth more than once before it can believe. "I found you here," she said. "You were wrapped in a white cloth. Weak, crying. There was a note beside you and this." She held out the pendant, a simple string of black beads, worn with time. "It was placed around your neck. I believe it came from your birth mother. A woman in pain. A woman who loved you but could not care for you." Zikora touched the beads. He had worn them all his life but never asked where they came from. Now they felt heavier than ever. "She left me here," he asked. "She gave you to the river," Adis corrected gently. "To the spirits. To the forest. And to me." Zikora closed his eyes, feeling the morning wind brush his skin. The dreams of the crying woman at the river returned. The ache inside him was real. Deep. Burning. "I need to find her," he said. "I need to know why." Adis placed the pendant back around his neck. "Then go. But remember, wherever you go, you are always my son." A journey toward the unknown. The walk to Egum took nearly 2 days. Zikora followed forest paths Adis had shown him. His feet were sore, but his spirit was strong. In his hand, he held the staff she had given him, decorated with feathers, seeds, and small river stones. When he entered the edge of the village, people stopped and stared. His wild, confident look, his deep eyes and forest scent, made him seem like a spirit or a prince from a tale. He asked where the market square was. An old man pointed. Zikora walked there, his heart racing. He didn't know what he was looking for, only that he would know when he found it. The meeting of fate. Tari was in the market that morning, buying spices for a village festival. Her head was wrapped in bright yellow cloth, her arms full of palm oil and vegetables. She hummed quietly, unaware that her past was walking straight toward her. Zikora walked slowly through the market. The smells of roasted maize, fried fish, and spices filled the air. Voices called out, children laughed, but his eyes kept moving. And then, he saw her. A woman with kind eyes. A familiar softness. A face from somewhere deep in his dreams. She turned toward him, and her eyes fell on the pendant around his neck. The world stopped. The basket dropped from her hands. And Tari fainted. The unfolding truth. She woke on a mat under the mango tree, people fanning her, calling her name. Zikora sat nearby, watching her, confused and concerned. Obina arrived quickly, holding her hand. "Tari, what happened?" Her eyes fluttered open, and locked on Zikora. "That boy," she whispered, voice shaking. "His necklace. It's mine. It was my grandmother's. I left it with my son." Obina froze. She sat up slowly, holding her chest. "I left it, with the baby I abandoned. I thought he died. I thought he was gone." Zikora's eyes widened. "I am that baby?" he asked. Tari began to cry. "Where did you come from, child? Who raised you?" Zikora told her everything, Adis, the river, the herbs, the dreams. Tari wept. "I am your mother," she said. I never stopped thinking about you. Every night, I prayed for your life. Forgive me. Obinna turned away, tears in his eyes. Then he turned back to Zikora and knelt. I did not know, he said. But if you let me, I would be honored to be your father. The welcome home. News of Zikora spread quickly. The boy from the forest, the one abandoned at birth, had returned. And he was not sick or weak. He was tall, strong, wise beyond his years. A child of the river and the trees. The elders gathered again, this time under the sun, not in judgment, but in awe. Tari confessed her sin to them all, her voice shaking. I thought I was saving him, she said. But I carried that guilt every day of my life. Elder Boma nodded slowly. You made a hard choice. And the gods, in their mercy, have brought him back to you. The village clapped. They cried. They called it a miracle. And Zikora, the boy once rejected, was honored. He stood tall beside his mother and Obinna, the staff in his hand, the pendant shining on his chest. A reunion in the forest. Days later, Obinna and Tari made a journey into the forest to meet Adis. When they arrived at her hut, she was waiting at the door. Tari fell to her knees. Thank you, she whispered. For raising my son. For saving him. For giving him love. Adis raised her up gently. He was never just yours. He was given to the earth, and the earth gave him to me. Now he returns to you, but part of him will always belong to the forest. Obinna stepped forward and bowed. I owe you my son's life. Please forgive me for all of it. Adi smiled, her eyes filled with peace. The past is only a road, she said. It does not decide the destination. A child never lost. In the years that followed, Zikora lived between two worlds. He visited Adis often, learning more about herbs and healing. He helped sick children in the village. He planted trees, guided animals away from danger, and spoke to the river like an old friend. Tari never missed a chance to hold him close. Obinna told him stories of the city, of trade, of leadership. And when the village gathered at night, children would ask him, "Tell us your story again, Zikora." And he would smile and say, "I was never lost. I was only waiting to be found." Final words. A child never lost, only led by fate.